The sun had barely crept above the horizon, casting a soft, golden glow over the rugged hills of a remote African village. The air was thick with the scent of dew-soaked earth and wild flowers, and the distant hum of crickets filled the silence. In this forgotten corner of the world, where life moved at the pace of the seasons, a young woman named Amara trudged along a narrow dirt path. Her worn sandals kicked up small clouds of dust with each step, her hands clutching a woven basket half filled with roots and herbs she'd gathered from the forest's edge. At just 22, Amara was the heartbeat of her struggling family, a beacon of hope in a village where hope was as scarce as clean water. Amara's life was not an easy one. Her village, nestled deep in a valley surrounded by dense forests, was a place where time seemed to stand still. Mud brick huts with thatched roofs dotted the landscape, and the nearest town was a 2-day walk through treacherous terrain. Her mother, widowed years ago, was frail and often bedridden, leaving Amara to care for her younger siblings, Kofi and Nia. Every day was a battle to put food on the table, to keep the fire burning, to survive. Yet Amara never complained. Her heart was as wide as the savannah, and her spirit as resilient as the ancient baobab trees that stood sentinel over the village. On this particular morning, Amara had ventured deeper into the forest than usual. The family's small garden had yielded little this season, and the market trader who sometimes bought her herbs had promised a better price for rare roots found only in the heart of the woods. The forest was a place of both beauty and danger, lush with greenery, but teeming with wild animals and unpredictable weather. Amara knew the risks, but hunger was a cruel master, and she pressed on, her eyes scanning the undergrowth for the telltale leaves of the plant she sought. As she pushed through a tangle of vines, a faint sound caught her attention, a low, pained groan, barely audible over the rustle of leaves. Amara froze, her heart pounding. The forest was no place for strangers, and she'd heard stories of bandits hiding among the trees. But the sound came again, weaker this time, almost desperate. Against her better judgment, she followed it, stepping carefully over gnarled roots and past thorny bushes until she reached a small clearing. There, slumped against the base of a massive acacia tree, was a man. His clothes, though torn and stained with dirt, were of a quality Amara had never seen. Fine fabric, now shredded, clinging to his bloodied frame. His face was pale, his breathing shallow, and a deep gash across his arm oozed crimson onto the forest floor. He was older, perhaps in his 50s, with streaks of gray in his hair and a face etched with lines of hardship. To Amara, he looked like a man who had fought death and was losing. Her first instinct was to run. She had no medicine, no supplies, and barely enough strength to carry her basket home. Helping a stranger could bring trouble. Her village was wary of outsiders, and for good reason. But as she looked into the man's half-closed eyes, something stirred within her. She saw not just a stranger, but a human being clinging to life. Amara dropped her basket and knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she pressed them against the wound to slow the bleeding. "Hold on," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if he could hear her. "I'm going to help you." The man's lips moved, but no words came. His eyes flickered with a mix of pain and gratitude before closing again. Amara tore a strip from her own worn skirt and wrapped it tightly around his arm, praying it would be enough to stem the flow of blood. She didn't know who he was or how he'd ended up here, but she knew she couldn't leave him to die. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, Amara hoisted the man's arm over her shoulder and began the arduous task of dragging him back toward the village. The journey was grueling. The man was heavy, and the forest floor was uneven, littered with roots and rocks that seemed to conspire against her. Sweat poured down Amara's face, and her muscles screamed with every step. She thought of her mother, waiting at home, and her siblings, who depended on her. What was she doing, risking everything for a stranger? Yet each time doubt crept in, she looked at the man's face, pale but still breathing, and found a resolve to keep going. Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher in the sky. Amara's village finally came into view, its cluster of huts a welcome sight. But as she stumbled into the village square, dragging the unconscious man, she was met with stares of suspicion and fear. The villagers gathered, whispering among themselves. "Who is he?" they demanded. "Why did you bring an outsider here?" Some even suggested leaving him outside the village, fearing he might bring danger or disease. Amara stood her ground, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "He's hurt. He needs help. We can't turn him away." Her words were met with silence, then reluctant nods. The village healer, an elderly woman named Mama Zuri, stepped forward, her eyes narrowing as she examined the man. "He's not from here," she said gruffly, "but he's alive, thanks to you. Bring him to my hut." Together, Amara and a few others carried the man to Mama Zuri's small dwelling, where the healer set to work cleaning his wounds and brewing a herbal poultice. Amara stayed by his side, fetching water and tending to him as Mama Zuri muttered about the strangeness of the situation. The man's condition was critical, but he was stable for now. As night fell, Amara sat by the fire outside the hut, her mind racing. Who was this man? Why was he in the forest, so far from any town or city? His clothes, though ruined, hinted at wealth, and there was something in his bearing, even unconscious, that suggested he was no ordinary traveler. But what puzzled her most was a small object she'd found in his pocket while tending to him. A golden pocket watch, intricately engraved with symbols she didn't recognize. It was unlike anything she'd ever seen, heavy and polished, the kind of thing that belonged in a mansion, not a forest. Amara clutched the watch, her fingers tracing its edges. It felt like a clue to a mystery she hadn't asked to solve. Little did she know, this simple act of kindness, saving a stranger's life, would set in motion events that would change her world forever. The days that followed were a blur of exhaustion and hope for Amara. The stranger, whom the villagers had taken to calling the man from the forest, remained unconscious in Mama Zuri's hut. His fever raged, and though Mama Zuri's remedies kept him alive, his recovery was uncertain. Amara spent every spare moment by his side, balancing her duties to her family with her newfound responsibility. She couldn't explain why she felt so drawn to him, but something about his presence stirred a quiet determination in her. She had saved him once. She wouldn't let him slip away now. The village, however, was restless. Rumors swirled about the stranger's origins. Some said he was a fugitive, others a lost merchant. A few whispered darker tales of curses and spirits that haunted the forest. Amara ignored the gossip, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the man carried a story far bigger than anyone realized. The golden pocket watch, which she'd hidden in a small cloth pouch, weighed heavily on her mind. She hadn't told anyone about it, not even Mama Zuri. It felt like a secret meant only for her, though she didn't know why. One evening, as Amara sat by the man's side, his eyes fluttered open for the first time. They were a deep, piercing blue, and they locked onto hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Where am I?" he rasped, his voice weak but commanding. "You're safe," Amara said softly. "You're in my village. I found you in the forest. You were hurt." The man's brow furrowed, as if struggling to piece together fragments of memory. "The forest," he muttered, then winced, clutching his bandaged arm. "Thank you for saving me." Amara offered a small smile. Rest now. You need your strength. Over the next few days, the man, who introduced himself as Elias, began to recover. He spoke little, but his words carried a weight that hinted at a life far removed from the simplicity of the village. He asked about Amara, her family, and the village, listening intently as she shared stories of her daily struggles. Yet he revealed nothing about himself, deflecting her questions with a gentle smile or a change of subject. His reticence only deepened Amara's curiosity, and the golden watch, still hidden in her pouch, seemed to pulse with unspoken secrets. The village's suspicion grew with Elias's recovery. Some, like Tund, the village blacksmith, argued that an outsider couldn't be trusted. He's hiding something, Tund said one night at a village meeting, his voice booming. Why was he in the forest bleeding like that? We don't need his trouble. Others agreed, urging Amara to send him away once he could walk. But Amara stood firm. He's a person, not a problem, she said, her voice steady despite the glares. We don't abandon those in need. Mama Zuri, ever the voice of reason, supported Amara. The girl's right, she said, her eyes sweeping the crowd. We've cared for him this long. Let's see what he has to say when he's stronger. As Elias regained his strength, Amara noticed small details that set him apart. His hands, though calloused from his ordeal, were unmarred by the rough labor of village life. His speech, when he chose to speak, was polished, with a cadence that suggested education and refinement. And once, when she brought him water, she caught him staring at the horizon with a look of determination, as if he were planning something far beyond the confines of the village. One night, unable to sleep, Amara slipped out of her family's hut and sat under the stars, the golden watch in her hands. She turned it over, studying the intricate engravings, a series of interlocking circles and a crest she didn't recognize. As she traced the patterns, she heard footsteps behind her. It was Elias, leaning heavily on a makeshift crutch, his face pale but resolute. You kept it, he said, his voice low, almost reverent, as he gestured to the watch. Amara's heart raced. I found it in your pocket when I was tending to you. I didn't know if it was important. It is, Elias said, sitting beside her with a grimace. More than you can imagine. He hesitated, as if weighing how much to reveal. Then, with a sigh, he began to speak. My name is Elias Thornton. I'm not from here. I was traveling through the region on business when my convoy was attacked. Bandits, I think. I managed to escape into the forest, but I was wounded. I thought I'd die out there, until you found me. Amara listened, her mind spinning. Business? What kind of business brings a man like you to a place like this? Elias's eyes darkened. The kind that makes enemies. I deal in resources, minerals, mostly. There are people who'd rather see me dead than let me finish what I started. His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Amara wanted to ask more, but something in his tone told her to wait. Instead, she handed him the watch. This belongs to you, she said. It's beautiful. I've never seen anything like it. Elias took the watch, his fingers brushing hers. It's a family heirloom, he said quietly. It's been with me through everything. Keep it safe for me, Amara. Just a little longer. Before she could respond, a shout pierced the night. Tund and a group of men approached, their faces grim. You, Tund pointed at Elias. We've had enough of your secrets. Who are you, and what do you want here? Elias stood slowly, his gaze steady despite his weakened state. I mean no harm, he said. I owe my life to this village, to Amara. I'll leave as soon as I'm able, but I need time. Tund scoffed, but Amara stepped between them. He's still healing, she said firmly. Let him be. The tension was palpable, but Tund backed off, muttering under his breath. As the men dispersed, Elias turned to Amara. "You're brave," he said. "Braver than most." Amara shrugged, embarrassed. "I just did what was right." But as she returned to her hut that night, the watch tucked safely in her pouch, she couldn't shake the feeling that Elias's presence was about to change everything. His words about enemies and business dealings echoed in her mind, and she wondered what kind of danger might follow him, and whether she'd unwittingly brought it to her village. The village woke to a morning cloaked in unease. Word of the confrontation with Elias had spread like wildfire, and the air buzzed with whispered doubts and fears. Amara felt the weight of the villagers' stares as she went about her chores, fetching water from the well and tending to her siblings. Kofi, her younger brother, tugged at her sleeve, his wide eyes filled with questions. "Is the man dangerous, Amara? Why are people so angry?" "He's not dangerous," Amara said, ruffling his hair with a reassuring smile. "He's just different. They're scared because they don't understand him." But deep down, Amara wasn't so sure. Elias's vague answers and the mystery of his past gnawed at her. Who was he, really? And why had he been attacked? The golden watch, still hidden in her cloth pouch, felt like a key to answers she wasn't sure she wanted. Its intricate engravings seemed to whisper secrets, and every time she touched it, a shiver ran down her spine. She hadn't shown it to anyone, not even Mama Zuri, fearing it might stir more trouble. As the days passed, Elias grew stronger. He began to walk without a crutch, even helping with small tasks around Mama Zuri's hut, chopping firewood, carrying water, anything to prove he wasn't a burden. His presence was a quiet one, but his actions spoke louder than words. The villagers noticed some softening toward him, while others, like Tund, remained steadfast in their distrust. "He's too comfortable," Tund muttered one evening, sharpening a machete by the fire. "A man like that doesn't belong here." Amara ignored the grumbling, but she couldn't ignore the growing tension. The village was small, its people bound by tradition and survival, and an outsider, especially one as enigmatic as Elias, was a disruption they didn't welcome. She began to wonder if helping him had been a mistake, not because she regretted saving his life, but because she feared what his presence might bring. One afternoon, while gathering herbs near the forest's edge, Amara overheard a conversation that sent her heart racing. Two men, strangers in dark clothing, stood just beyond the tree line, their voices low but urgent. "He's here," one said, his tone sharp. "The boss wants him found, alive or dead. That watch is the key. Without it, the deal's off." Amara crouched behind a thicket, her breath shallow. Were they talking about Elias? The watch? Her hand instinctively went to the pouch at her waist, where the golden timepiece was hidden. She didn't know what deal they meant, but the menace in their voices was unmistakable. She waited until the men moved deeper into the forest before slipping away, her mind racing with questions. That night, she confronted Elias in Mama Zuri's hut. The healer was asleep, and the flickering firelight cast long shadows across the room. Elias sat on a mat, his expression weary but alert. "Who are you, really?" Amara demanded, her voice low but firm. "I heard men in the forest today. They're looking for you. And this." She pulled the watch from her pouch, holding it up like an accusation. Elias's eyes widened, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned forward, his voice steady. "You kept it safe. Thank you, Amara. But you're right. You deserve the truth." He took a deep breath, as if unburdening himself of a weight he'd carried too long. "My name is Elias Thornton, and well, let's just say I'm a man with means. I own a company that deals in rare minerals, the kind that power industries and spark wars. I was traveling through this region to secure a deal, a big one, but someone betrayed me. My convoy was ambushed, and I barely escaped with my life. That watch, he nodded toward the object in her hand, it's more than an heirloom. It's a key, encoded with information about the deal. If it falls into the wrong hands, people could die. Amara's mouth went dry. A key? To what? To a vault, Elias said. One that holds documents and samples of a mineral deposit unlike anything the world has seen. It's worth billions, Amara. And there are men, dangerous men, who'll stop at nothing to get it. Her mind reeled. Billions? The word felt foreign, incomprehensible in the context of her life, where a single coin could mean the difference between eating or going hungry. Why didn't you tell me? She asked, her voice trembling. I brought you here to my village. What if those men come for you? Elias's face softened, and for the first time, she saw genuine regret in his eyes. I didn't want to drag you into this. You saved my life, Amara. I owe you everything, but I swear I'll leave as soon as I'm strong enough. I won't let harm come to you or your people. But harm is already on its way. The next morning, the village woke to the sound of hoofbeats. A group of armed men, led by a tall figure in a tailored coat, rode into the square. Their leader, a man with cold eyes and a scar across his cheek, dismounted and addressed the villagers. We're looking for a man named Elias Thornton, he said, his voice smooth but laced with menace. Hand him over, and no one gets hurt. Panic rippled through the crowd. Amara's heart pounded as she realized the danger Elias had warned her about was now at her doorstep. She glanced at Mama Zuri, who gave her a subtle nod, as if to say, do what you must. Amara slipped away, her hand clutching the watch, and ran to the hut where Elias was hiding. We have to go, she whispered urgently. They're here for you. Elias's jaw tightened, but he nodded. I'm sorry, Amara. I never meant for this to happen. Together, they slipped out the back of the hut, moving toward the forest under the cover of dawn's dim light. Amara didn't know where they were going or how they'd escape, but she knew one thing. She'd saved Elias once, and she wasn't about to let him, or her village, fall to these men. As they disappeared into the trees, the watch in her pouch felt heavier than ever, a ticking reminder that the stakes were far higher than she'd ever imagined. The forest closed around Amara and Elias like a living thing, its dense canopy swallowing the first rays of sunlight. They moved quickly, despite Elias's lingering weakness, guided by Amara's knowledge of the terrain. Her heart pounded, not just from the exertion, but from the weight of what she'd learned. Elias wasn't just a man. He was a billionaire, a target, and now a fugitive whose enemies had brought danger to her village. The golden watch, still tucked in her cloth pouch, was no longer a curiosity, but a beacon for trouble, its engraved surface a map to a world Amara could scarcely imagine. They didn't speak as they navigated the tangled undergrowth, but Amara's mind was a storm of questions. Why had she risked so much for a stranger? What would happen to her family if the men found them? And what was it about Elias that made her trust him, even now? His confession had shaken her, but his eyes, those piercing blue eyes, held a sincerity that anchored her resolve. She'd saved his life once, and now, with armed men threatening her village, she felt bound to see this through. The air grew cooler as they descended into a ravine, where a small stream gurgled over smooth stones. Elias leaned against a tree, his breath ragged. We can't keep running, he said, his voice strained but firm. They'll find us eventually. We need a plan. Amara crouched beside him, her eyes scanning the forest for any sign of pursuit. Who are these men, Elias? And what do they want with the watch? Elias wiped sweat from his brow, his expression grim. The watch isn't just a keepsake. It's a key to a digital vault, encrypted data about a mineral deposit my company discovered. It's a resource that could power entire cities, but it's also a prize for those who'd use it for less noble purposes. The men after me work for a rival, a man named Victor Kane. He's ruthless, Amara. He wants the watch to control the deposit, and he'll kill anyone in his way. Amara's stomach churned. She'd heard of men like Kane in stories, powerful figures who treated the world like a chessboard, moving people like pawns. But she never imagined her quiet village would become part of such a game. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice steady despite her fear. Elias met her gaze, a spark of determination in his eyes. "We get to town with a signal. I can contact my people, get the watch to safety. But I need your help, Amara. You know this land better than I ever will." She nodded, her mind racing. The nearest town was a 2-day trek, through terrain that grew more treacherous the farther they went. But she couldn't turn back now, not with her village at risk. "There's a path through the hills," she said. "It's hidden, used by hunters. If we're careful, we can make it." They set off again, moving under the cover of dusk. Amara led the way, her senses attuned to every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig. The forest was her home, but tonight it felt like a labyrinth of shadows, each one hiding a potential threat. Elias followed close behind, his strength waning but his resolve unwavering. They spoke little, but a quiet trust grew between them, forged in the crucible of shared danger. As night fell, they found shelter in a small cave, its entrance concealed by vines. Amara built a modest fire, just enough to keep them warm without drawing attention. Elias sat across from her, his face illuminated by the flickering flames. "You didn't have to do this," he said softly. "You could have left me in the forest or turned me over to those men. Why didn't you?" Amara stared into the fire, her thoughts drifting to her mother's frail hands, her siblings' hopeful eyes. "Because it was right," she said simply. "My mother taught me that kindness isn't about what you get back. It's about who you are." Elias's expression softened, and for a moment he looked like a man unburdened by wealth or secrets. "You remind me of someone," he said. "Someone I lost a long time ago." She believed in doing what was right, no matter the cost. Before Amara could ask more, a distant shout broke the silence. They doused the fire and pressed deeper into the cave, listening as footsteps crunched through the underbrush outside. Amara's heart raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. She gestured for Elias to stay quiet, her hand resting on the watch in her pouch. If the men found them, she'd protect it, and him at all costs. The night passed in tense silence, the pursuers moving on without discovering their hiding place. By dawn, Amara and Elias resumed their journey, pushing through exhaustion toward the distant town. As they climbed higher into the hills, the landscape opened up, revealing a breathtaking view of the valley below. Amara paused, catching her breath, and Elias stood beside her, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "We're close," he said. "If we make it to town, I can end this. I promise." But their journey was far from over. As they descended the final ridge, a group of men emerged from the trees, led by the scarred man from the village, Victor, Kane's enforcer. "Thornton," he barked, his pistol glinting in the sunlight. "Hand over the watch, and the girl lives." Amara's blood ran cold, but she stepped in front of Elias, her voice steady. "You'll have to go through me." The enforcer laughed, a cruel sound that echoed through the hills. "Brave, but foolish. You have no idea what you're protecting." Elias placed a hand on Amara's shoulder, his voice calm but firm. "She's protecting more than you know, Malik. Walk away, and no one gets hurt." The standoff was electric, each second stretching into eternity. Amara's mind raced, searching for a way out. She remembered a narrow pass nearby, a shortcut to the town that was treacherous but defensible. If they could reach it, they might have a chance. With a subtle glance at Elias, she signaled her plan, and he gave a faint nod. In a sudden burst of movement, Amara grabbed Elias's hand and bolted toward the pass, the men shouting and giving chase. The path was steep and rocky, but Amara's agility gave them an edge. Bullets whizzed past, splintering trees, but she didn't falter. Elias stumbled, but kept pace, driven by a will to survive. They reached the pass, a narrow gorge with high walls that shielded them from gunfire. Amara's heart pounded as she pushed forward, the town's faint lights now visible in the distance. But as they emerged from the gorge, Malik and his men were waiting, cutting off their escape. "End of the line," Malik sneered, raising his weapon. Amara clutched the watch, her mind racing. She didn't know what power it held, but she knew it was her only leverage. "You want this?" she shouted, holding it aloft. "Come and get it." Before Malik could respond, a low rumble filled the air. Headlights pierced the dawn as a convoy of vehicles roared up the road. Elias's people, summoned by a signal he'd managed to send during their trek. The men scattered, outnumbered and outgunned, and Malik disappeared into the forest, his plans thwarted. Elias collapsed to his knees, relief washing over him. "You did it, Amara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved me again." As the convoy surrounded them, a man in a crisp suit stepped forward, introducing himself as Elias's head of security. "Mr. Thornton, the vault is secure. We've got everything under control." Amara handed Elias the watch, her hands trembling. "This belongs to you," she said. "I hope it was worth it." Elias took the watch, but his eyes never left hers. "It's worth more than you know," he said. "And so are you." Days later, the village was abuzz with a different kind of energy. Elias, now fully recovered, had returned with a promise that would change everything. He revealed his true identity, a billionaire philanthropist whose company was revolutionizing clean energy. In gratitude for Amara's courage, he pledged to fund a new school, a clinic, and clean water systems for the village. Her family, once on the brink of despair, would never know hunger again. But the greatest reward wasn't material. As Amara stood with Elias, watching workers break ground on the new clinic, he turned to her with a smile. "You've shown me what true wealth is, Amara. It's not in vaults or minerals. It's in the heart of someone who'd risk everything for a stranger." Amara blushed, her eyes shining. "I just did what was right." And in that moment, under the African sun, she knew that kindness, no matter how small, could light up the world. The village, once a place of struggle, was now a beacon of hope, proof that a single act of compassion could change lives forever. The sun rose over the village, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, a quiet promise of new beginnings. It had been 6 months since the day Amara stood with Elias Thornton, watching the first shovels break ground for the new clinic. The village, once a cluster of weathered huts clinging to survival, was now a place of transformation. The clinic stood proudly at the edge of the square, its white walls gleaming under the morning light. A school, its classrooms filled with the chatter of children, had replaced the old, crumbling structure where Amara had once learned to read. And at the heart of the village, a new well pumped clean water, a gift that had banished the long treks to distant streams. Amara walked through the village, her worn basket replaced by a sturdy one gifted by her neighbors. Her siblings, Kofi and Nia, trailed behind her, their faces brighter than she'd ever seen. The weight of hunger no longer pressed on their shoulders, and their laughter was a melody that warmed her heart. Her mother, too, had found new strength, her health restored by the medicines now available at the clinic. The village was alive in a way it hadn't been in Amara's lifetime, and she couldn't help but feel a quiet pride knowing she'd played a part in it. But change, even good change, brought its own challenges. The villagers, once united by their shared struggle, now grappled with the unfamiliar. Some embraced the new opportunities, sending their children to school and seeking treatment at the clinic. Others, like Tund, the blacksmith, remained wary, muttering about outsiders and the dangers of relying on a stranger's wealth. What happens when he leaves? Tund had asked their recent gathering, his voice heavy with doubt. What happens when this billionaire forgets us? Amara understood their fears. She'd felt them herself in the days after Elias's convoy arrived, when the reality of his identity and the danger it brought had sunk in. But she'd also seen the sincerity in Elias's eyes, the gratitude that went beyond words. He hadn't just given them money. He'd given them hope, and that was something no one could take away. Today, Amara was headed to the clinic, where Elias had promised to visit. He'd returned to the city after their escape through the hills, but he'd kept in touch, sending letters and supplies, ensuring the projects he'd funded were completed. Amara hadn't seen him since that day under the African sun, when he'd called her the true wealth of the world. His words had stayed with her, a reminder that her simple act of kindness had rippled far beyond the forest where she'd found him. As she approached the clinic, she saw a familiar figure standing by the entrance, his silhouette unmistakable despite the months apart. Elias Thornton, dressed not in the tattered clothes of their first meeting, but in a crisp shirt and trousers, looked every bit the billionaire he was. Yet his smile, warm and genuine, was the same one she'd seen in Mama Zuri's hut when he'd first opened his eyes. "Amara," he said, stepping forward, his voice carrying the same quiet strength she remembered. "It's good to see you." She smiled, suddenly shy. "You came back." "Of course I did," he said, his eyes scanning the village. "I wanted to see what you've done with this place. It's remarkable." Amara followed his gaze, taking in the changes. Children played near the well, their laughter mingling with the hum of activity from the school. Women carried baskets of fresh produce, grown in new gardens irrigated by the well. The clinic buzzed with patients, some from neighboring villages, drawn by stories of free care and modern medicine. "It's not just me," she said. "It's all of us. You gave us the tools, but we're the ones building this future." Elias shook his head, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "Don't sell yourself short, Amara. None of this would have happened without you. You saved my life, and in doing so, you saved this village." She blushed, unsure how to respond. The weight of his words felt too big for her small shoulders, but she couldn't deny the truth in them. Her decision to drag a dying man from the forest had set everything in motion, a chain of events that had transformed her world. Elias gestured for her to walk with him, and they strolled through the village, passing the school where Nia waved from a classroom window. "I've been thinking about you," Elias said, his tone thoughtful, "about what you did and why. Most people would have walked away, Amara. They would have seen a stranger, a risk, and kept going. But you didn't. I want to understand why." Amara paused, considering his question. She thought of her mother's stories, told by firelight, of heroes who faced impossible odds because it was right. She thought of Kofi and Nia, who deserved a better life than the one she'd known. And she thought of the moment she'd seen Elias, bleeding and alone, and known she couldn't leave him to die. "It's who I am," she said finally. "I don't have much. None of us do. But I have my heart, and it told me to help you. That's all." Elias stopped, his eyes searching hers. "That's more than most people have, Amara. And it's why I want to offer you something." Her heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "I'm starting a foundation," he said, his voice steady but filled with purpose. "One that will bring resources to places like this, schools, clinics, opportunities for people who've been overlooked. I want you to be part of it. Not just here, but in the city where you can learn, grow, and help others like you've helped me. Amara's breath caught. The city? It was a world she'd only heard of in stories, a place of towering buildings and endless possibilities, but also one that felt as distant as the stars. I, I don't know, she stammered. My family needs me here. The village needs me. Elias nodded, understanding. I'm not asking you to leave them. I'm asking you to dream bigger. You could study, become a leader, show the world what someone like you can do. Your family will be cared for, I promise. And you can always come back. The offer was overwhelming, a door to a life she'd never dared imagine. But it also stirred a fear deep within her, the fear of leaving the only home she'd ever known, of stepping into a world where she might not belong. She looked at Elias, then at the village, her heart torn between the familiar and the unknown. That evening, Amara sat with her mother by the fire, sharing Elias's offer. Her mother's eyes, once dulled by illness, now shone with pride. You've always been our light, Amara, she said, her voice soft but firm. This is your chance to shine for others, too. Go. We'll be here, stronger because of you. The next morning, Amara made her decision. She would go to the city, not to chase wealth or fame, but to learn how to help others as Elias had helped her village. She packed a small bag, her hands lingering on the golden watch, which Elias had insisted she keep as a reminder of their shared journey. Its weight was no longer a burden, but a symbol of the trust they'd built. As she stood at the edge of the village, ready to board the vehicle that would take her to the city, the villagers gathered to see her off. Tund, his earlier doubts softened by the changes he'd witnessed, clasped her shoulder. You've made us proud, Amara, he said gruffly. Don't forget us. Never, she promised, her voice thick with emotion. Elias stood beside her, his presence a steady anchor. You're not just changing your life, he said. You're changing the world, one act of kindness at a time. As the vehicle pulled away, Amara looked back at her village, its new buildings gleaming in the sunlight. She thought of the forest, where a single choice had set this all in motion. She thought of the watch, its engravings a testament to the power of compassion. And she thought of the future, vast and uncertain, but filled with possibility. The world beyond the village was waiting, and Amara was ready to meet it, not as a poor village girl, but as a beacon of hope, proof that kindness, no matter how small, could light up even the darkest corners. And somewhere, deep in her heart, she knew that this was only the beginning.